All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Citizens Climate Lobby Electrification Action Team webinar. This is our second webinar in a series about green banks and green financing and how does that work in communities to help with decarbonization, among the many other goals of green banks and CDFIs. And our goal in this series is to help CCL volunteers around the country understand how these institutions, which many of us have not worked with before in the past, are really great partners in community engagement as we try to pursue building electrification policies and actions around the country. So we have three fantastic guest speakers today, and we'll introduce, I'll just list them right now, and then we'll let each of them do a self-introduction at the beginning of their speaking engagement. But Lucy Baglieri is from Loose Impact Strategies, and she's a consultant who helps communities find financing to achieve goals. Dan Martin is a developer who's working on solar projects and working with some CDFIs. And Jonathon Chan is with the Self-Help Credit Union, providing green bank, green financing. So, but before we hear from them, Michael Metzner is going to give us a recap of our April webinar where he did an overview of this green financing ecosystem. So, Michael, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, Pete, can you share that slide deck?
Yes, give me just a second.
Anyway, I'll just start by thanking everybody for taking some time out to continue our discussion on green banks. I'm sure some of you were here at our last one a month ago. And as Pete said, I'm just going to spend a few minutes recapping our introduction to the green banks presentation from last month. Once we get those slides up, we'll continue.
Yep, and ready to go now.
Okay, so what are green banks? Green banks are kind of public, quasi-public, or nonprofit financial institutions, and they use public and private capital to pursue clean energy goals. Among other things, and a number of them are listed on the next, go to the next slide, Pete. Among other things, they may offer below market rate loans. They may take risks that the market's not currently accepting. They may provide support to lenders in underserved markets. And maybe most importantly, in doing all of that, they improve access to clean energy projects and the related economic benefits for low and moderate income communities. And just to be clear, green banks are not a giveaway program. They expect to be repaid, may even make a profit. In fact, with the existing slate of green banks, 99% of them, 99% of the loans made by those institutions have been repaid. So the main idea is that any subsidies green banks provide by helping plug a gap in the financing are offset by the health, climate, and economic benefits they catalyze. Next slide, Pete. As far as the type of projects being supported or will be supported, this slide shows several examples of projects supported by green banks. They range from low and moderate income residential energy efficiency and electrification projects to bike lanes and pedestrian walkways, from mass transit to climate adaptation. Next slide shows how green banks can help, the sort of tools they have in the toolbox, or mechanisms for helping get financings done. And so what are some of the more common techniques used by green banks? Let's take a look at just one of them, aggregation and warehousing, which sounds kind of geeky, but it's important. There's a lot of inefficiencies of scale And those inefficiencies of scale are a significant barrier to private investment in small geographically dispersed projects like residential or small business energy efficiency projects. So what the Green Bank can do is pool these kinds of loans. If a pool of these kinds of loans are bundled together to diversify the risk and achieve scale, the projects then become far more attractive to lenders. The Green Bank can do just that. It can accomplish that by underwriting loans directly and warehousing them until scale is reached, and they can turn around and sell them to private investors, either through securitization or private placement. And then, so by that way, they get much more efficient financing, lower cost of capital, ultimately for these projects, which means a lot more projects get built than otherwise. As far as the existing Green Bank, on the next slide, first one in the U.S. was Connecticut in 2011. Now, this data I'm told may be a little bit old, so if anything, these numbers are bigger. But as of this data, 23 green banks in 17 states, including the ones you see there, and many others are exploring the concept. The 23 existing green banks have raised and invested a total of $2.5 billion, leveraging an additional $6.5 billion of private funds. So almost 3 times what they were capitalized with, they were able to get from the private sector. Over 99% of these loans have been repaid. Now, this is something that's getting, the next slide shows the greenhouse gas reduction, GGRF. Briefly, on the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA was signed into law on August 16, 2022. This graphic shows how the money owed for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The IRA mandated $27 billion for that fund to be administered by EPA. In turn, created 3 intermediary funds: the National Clean Investment Fund, NCIF, the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, CCIA, and Solar for All, SFA. And the IRA funded those funds with $14 billion, $6 billion, and $7 billion respectively. Those 3 funds ran extensive, detailed application processes, resulting in the awarding of the $20 billion combined NCIF and CCIA funds to 8 national green banks, which were described in detail in last month's webinar, so I'm not going to go into those. Go to the next. This is the last. As far as this has been in the press a lot, and the risk to the GGRF under the Trump administration. I'll just read a few of these headlines. February 13th, 2025, Trump EPA aims to claw back $20 billion in green bank funds. March 4th, EPA $20 billion funding freeze leaves green bank nonprofits unable to pay bills. March 17th, EPA offers no new evidence in battle over $20 billion in climate grants. That's from the New York Times. And then April 2nd, EPA's hunt for shady deals and gold bars comes up empty. Subtitle on that one, which you can't see, is the agency head said a $20 billion Biden climate program was marred by fraud and abuse. A judge said on Wednesday the EPA hasn't provided evidence. So key takeaways from this presentation last month. We go to the next slide, Pete. Existing green banks play a vital role in meeting our climate goals by stepping up to fill the financing gap left by private investors. And we can see that in some of the numbers which we cited. In April 2024, the IRA funded and EPA administered Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund created 8 new national green banks, capitalized with $20 billion, of which $14 billion was set aside for low-income and disadvantaged communities. These mission-driven financial intermediaries will mobilize private capital and deliver clean energy and climate solutions to communities across America. However, as previously noted, on February 18th, Trump EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin froze the awardees' access to the $20 billion grants, alleging malfeasance and or mismanagement. This is in the courts now. Um, so far, the judge, every judge that's come before has challenged the administration's actions here, but it's likely to be tied up in the courts for quite a while longer. So really, this is really a fluid situation in terms of what money can these funds actually get hold of and use. And maybe we'll get a little more into that in the balance of the presentation. I know Jay will probably have something to say on that. So with that, I'll turn it back to Pete.
Great. Thanks very much, Michael. Let's pause here to see if there's any quick questions before we dive into discussion. Anybody? All right. Well, then with that, it's my delight to introduce Lucy Arellano Baglieri, who's the CEO of Loose Impact Strategies. And I gave a very short description and probably butchered it. So, Lucy, please do a better job introducing yourself and your company, and tell us a little bit about how the role you play in connecting financing with communities.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks to everyone for having me here to shed a little bit of light, particularly on the CDFI angle. Pete, you did a great job in introducing, and actually, Michael, the overview from the prior one is a good tee up as well, really good context setting. My background is in community and economic development and have worked in a variety of different roles, including affordable housing development and CDFI lending. So I've held institutional executive roles within CDFIs, within developers and community development organizations, and now have a firm, as was mentioned, Loose Impact Strategies, that's really continuing to push on equity, racial equity, economic equity, et cetera, climate equity, it definitely being a key consideration. And I now have a bit of a bird's eye view, I like to say, across CDFIs. I partner with organizations, small place-based organizations, all the way to national networks and national CDFIs that are continuing to try to advance all of this work despite some of the challenges that Michael laid out. And interestingly enough, my relationship with green banks has been primarily in terms of leveraging green bank financing. One of the opportunities that was highlighted was credit enhancement, for example. So an organization that I worked within, actually, we were successful in raising a sizable amount of credit enhancement investment, which it's interesting, as you were laying it out, Michael, I was thinking it's so funny that some of the gaps that are left by private investment where this green banks and CDFIs are stepping into actually once CDFIs or green banks do step into it, then re-incentivize the private investment in terms of coming back. So it's a little bit of a kind of a funny dance. But as you mentioned, and just to make sure, I always like to pause and make sure that everybody knows what a CDFI is, a community development financial institution. A lot of times, kind of simply put, folks think of it as a nonprofit bank. But really, this is actually another area where this administration has attempted to put in some barriers. So the CDFI fund, which was established in the 90s and is housed under the Federal Department of Treasury, and this was, the CDFI fund was enacted into law and helped set up the CDFI kind of network and infrastructure or ecosystem. It also provides really favorable capital as well that has allowed a lot of this kind of climate focused work to move forward. Recently, the administration mandated that it be essentially stopped other than what was required by statute. Now, the silver lining here is that actually it is Treasury's perspective that most, if not all, of the work of the CDFI fund is required from a statute perspective. So, but has sent folks scrambling. and kind of compounds the challenges that the halt on GGRF has put in the way. I wanted to take just a little bit of a step back in terms of thinking about prior to this administration. The big thing that has always stood out to me, two things I would say about green banks or green financing within the CDFI field, which is really kind of more my angle. Is that this should be as integrated across all financing as possible. So as I think about the work that you all do and kind of the messaging that you're trying to convey, throughout the community and economic development work that I've done, there's no place that climate considerations don't show up. I'm in California, so across this state, it ranges from, Michael and I were just saying, it's already heating up. I'm in Northern California. A lot of the communities that are served the most by this sort of financing are in some of the hottest areas, the most prone to wildfire risk, flooding risk. Some interesting things like in Southern California, obviously compounds these issues, but high winds where structures might fall down repeatedly, and making sure that financing is available for rebuilding and kind of fortifying those as very specific examples is important. Um, when I think about the role of the key players in this space, like green banks or CDFIs, I also think about innovation. So historically, this sort of financing has allowed folks to innovate, as was laid out, where private investment might pull back or kind of avoid. CDFIs, green banks, et cetera, often are key partners or liaisons and trusted partners at that, between community and kind of the mainstream investors. As I mentioned, kind of having a first pass with some credit enhancement, for example, or even having the kind of green flag attached to it, oftentimes will incentivize much more investment coming to the table. I worked with a CDFI that several years ago actually put a bond out to market. This was, depending on the moment in time, there are different political cycles, different kind of trends, different language changes, or kind of programs change. But in this case, it was actually put together as a green bond. And again, this was several years ago. So, but investors were it really met their appetite. So this bond was initially intended to be a $100 million bond, and it was oversubscribed by 10x. So there was $1 billion of demand for 100 million that was available because it had that green flag. And so once the CDFI was able to bring in that sort of capital, it really allowed them to be much more nimble, much more agile, get really creative with products. That's something that's really, really important. The intel that these organizations gather from being that trusted partner, then they can put together some niche products that will get down to smaller, maybe more emerging developers or community-based organizations that might not be able to access it directly from a large public entity or from a larger investor. So there are many, many reasons why this is really important. I would be remiss not to mention that these financial institutions are highly sophisticated. So, it's not disparaging to say it's a nonprofit bank by any means. There are CDFIs that are S&P rated, that really kind of can stand up next to some of these larger mainstream financial institutions, and have sophisticated underwriting and risk mitigation strategies in place so that they can be really good stewards for lots of different types of public or private investment. And as was, I believe, mentioned, also really leverage it exponentially, blend it with multiple sources to really get at these high impact projects in different areas, and remove the barriers that exist and that continue to evolve. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions along the way.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucy. And folks, I believe what we'd prefer to do is to go through all three presentations and then hold the questions until the end for the whole group. So, but if you have anything that you just can't get off your mind, go ahead and type it into the chat. And otherwise, at this point, we'll start with Dan Martin. Dan is the CEO of Amped Up Solutions, one of my favorite company names. And Dan, go ahead and tell us what you do as a project developer.
Sure. Thanks, Pete and Michael, for having me. Lucy, thanks for your teeing up the conversation here. Amped develops behind the meter solar and battery projects in California. And by behind the meter, what we're talking about is our customer is a business. It's like a hotel, for instance. Front of meter projects are those where you're selling to a utility, which is also a business, but it's a little bit different in that you're selling power to PG&E or something like that. So I've struggled in the past with that issue that's come up in Michael's slide deck and in Lucy's comments, credit enhancement. So I was an early on developer, project developer, maybe 7 years ago. I had terrible credit. And I chose to focus on a really challenging sector, which is hospitality, hotels. Each hotel is a separate LLC, probably family owned, even though the sign on the front of it says Holiday Inn and it rolls up into IHG, which is Intercontinental Hotel Group. IHG is exposing 0% of its balance sheet to any solar deal. So you're really dealing with an individual family that owns that hotel and a new developer and a terrible credit. If you are a bank, a traditional bank, not a green bank maybe, but a regular bank, you say, show me the big juicy tomato I can sink my teeth into if someone doesn't pay their bills, right? And they like to focus on the mush market, we call it, municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals, right? The easy credits. They're lazy. They're bankers. They're lazy. They want an institutionally rated credit that they know will pay. And if they don't pay, they can sue them and make them pay. And as such, we had to do a lot of financial jujitsu to get these deals financed. My first projects were 6 hotel projects, a portfolio of 6 hotels. And so in addition to things like posting reserve requirements, letters of credit, et cetera, I worked with a company called Energetic Insurance to pioneer the first ever off-taker default policy, which is a very simple insurance product that pays out if the off-taker, in this case, my customer, the hotel, went bankrupt. That was the key thing to get my sort of institutional bank, customers bank, to do the deal. They needed to know that if the hotel went bankrupt, that they would get paid, right? And so that is an insurance product that I'd like to take into a new offering involving green banks. And so we are in the process of raising a $100 million fund to target farmers in the Central Valley. And Central Valley, California. The farmers right now are getting crushed. If you look at what's happening on the tariff front, China is retaliating against the only thing they really buy in any bulk. They buy airplanes and they buy farm products, basically, from the United States. So they're placing very high tariffs on those commodities. The labor is very scared because of ICE and sort of the threat of deportation. So the farms are having trouble getting labor. The crop prices are down, and the demand is down because you've got a major buyer exiting the market right now. And meanwhile, a lot of their solar was done 15 years ago. And there's this magic thing that happens in a solar project. It's called your inverter breaks at year 10 or 15, yet your panels last maybe 30 years. So they're really in a tough financial situation where their operations are not profitable or barely break even. They do not look like good credits, and they're getting retaliated against through no fault of their own. So what we're trying to do, and we're in the very early stages of this, is work with the iBank, which stands for the Infrastructure Bank. I call them a green bank. I don't know if they would accept that nomenclature or not. They work with 7 what they call FDCs, or Financial Development Corp, is I think the real name of it, throughout the state, as sort of like partners to implement many programs. But I think the core of it is a credit enhancement offering. And so they will guarantee 80% of a loan loss, but not 20%. So you got to find somebody willing to be the first, most at risk partner in the deal. And so that's what we're in the process of doing, and maybe using the energetic policy to cover that. So there's this difference between actual risk and perceived risk. Hotels, for instance, are perceived as very risky because there isn't that big balance sheet to sink your teeth into. But the actual risk is very small. They need electricity. And if I can provide electricity cheaper than PG&E, they're going to pay me versus PG&E. So the number of defaults is very low, yet from an underwriting standpoint, like I said, bankers are lazy, so they don't want to do all that research, and they'd much rather underwrite the Palo Alto School District than some farmer in the Central Valley that's got a break-even operation. So we will we're seeking lenders right now into that pool. We're looking at family foundations, other people that have a target segment on agriculture. It would be super interesting to me if we could free up some of that EPA money. This is a very Trump-aligned sort of target audience in terms of farmers that are getting impacted because of China. And it is consistent with a lot of the original, purpose of that greenhouse gas reduction fund of providing more clean energy. So it's possible we could use some of this, capacity in new ways. I don't know what will happen. I don't know how much of it's been obligated to specific borrowers versus just more intermediaries. But I'll stop there. We have identified projects. There's a definite need, and now we're in the process of raising the fund.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Dan. All right. And so next, I will reintroduce Jonathon Chan with Self-Help Credit Union. Jonathon described to us you have, I think, 37 branches in 5 states along the East Coast, and one of them is particularly interesting because of flooding last fall. So, and I know that's a big priority for you. So, Jonathon, I won't steal your thunder. Go ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, hi y'all. My name is Jonathan Chan. I have lived in North Carolina for about 20 years. I did all my schooling from 4th grade up to my graduates in climate change and society at NC State University. So, I'm very much rooted in this state, and our self-help credit union's geography is from Virginia all the way down to Florida. So hope you don't mind. I will be doing a presentation, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do that if I can get permission to do so uh, from the host. Um,
Yep, you should be good to go now.
okay, great, fantastic. Let's see. Does it look good?
Not
I'm
yet.
not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
There we go.
You're coming up right now.
Fantastic. Great.
Got it.
So, this presentation I'm called Perspectives on Green Consumer Loans from a CDFI. So I am the Green Consumer Lending Products Manager, so I'll be mostly speaking on consumer lending rather than some of the larger commercial lending. But self-help does do that as well. But introduction to self-help, we were founded in 1985 to build wealth in low-income and minority communities in North Carolina. And we grew largely through merging with various community-based and employer-based credit unions. An example we have is Community Trust Federal Credit Union that we merged with, which served migrant farmer workers in Apopka, Florida, and as well as First Legacy Community Credit Union, which started in 1941 to serve Black educators working in segregated schools in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we really do work with all types of people, with a large membership in rural areas and in low-income areas, and really focusing in on the folks who are least served by mainstream financial institutions. So I want to talk a bit about what does our membership face, because I think it's a really good way of looking at just setting up the stage. So our folks, they have challenges to building wealth that they face, including historic segregation, redlining, difficulty accessing homeownership, predatory financial lenders that do things like payday loans, and they face a lack of emergency savings. Low-income homeowners often face higher energy burdens with older building stock. I think our demographic tends to perceive EVs and rooftop solar as products for the wealthy. Their local utilities might be hostile to these new technologies, and while home energy efficiency is a bright market, most people delay replacement until an appliance breaks. So, in order for self-help to really play a role, we have to be right in front of the customer when that happens, at least largely speaking. So, as for a consumer lending strategy, I think this is what we have come up with. So, first is that we have to educate ourselves and connect with knowledgeable partners before we can educate our members, because what we are is we're a financial institution, and we're very good at doing that. But green lending and green technologies is less so. So we designated green lending as a long-term priority for the institution, and we're building subject matter expertise so that we can apply for funding, such as those federal funds or other funds that are out there. And we're doubling down on our strengths and looking for partners where we lack expertise. And then the final part is that we need to really understand the entire supply chain, so that we're not having all these cogs in a machine, but none of them aligned with each other. So I think from our experience thus far is that there's a general recipe for success. It's education, funding, and partnerships. And like we need to, when we started from the beginning, we were thinking about, okay, so do the people that are in charge, do they even have the experience with these technologies? Can they articulate the value of the technologies? Our loan officers couldn't do that. And so we had to train them with a pilot to have them drive an EV for a week, because how could they possibly talk to people about EVs if they don't know anything about the product? What communities are we engaging with, and when are we doing so? So, we obviously know our demographic very well, but we don't know about other demographics. How are we talking about the benefits of green technology? So, we're very comfortable talking about financial benefit, but, maybe a little less so on the resilience, and maybe on the environmental justice, and probably not very much on climate change, although I personally am okay with doing that. But, how do we talk about this in a way that's culturally relevant? Because I think in one of your presentations, you brought up like the six Americas, and I think our demographic is disengaged. They're not hostile. They need to make sure that everybody in their family is fed. Sort of different challenges that they're facing. I think you already talked about funding, so I'm gonna skip over this. And then partnerships. So we have a couple of different partners, and through these partnerships, we were able to provide those green bank benefits. And I'm going to go through a couple of them. So credit enhancement with Opportunity Finance Network, we're able to do loans to low-income borrowers for EVs. I'm going to talk more about Electrify Ashland County, but it's a loan loss mitigation. And we have a partnership with Solar United Neighbors, and they basically do group purchases of solar equipment and solar projects. So they get the economies of scale. I'm gonna do a quick case study of like how do we put this all into practice at Suffolk Credit Union. So, so the problem that the city of Asheville and Buncombe County in North Carolina faced was that they wanted to reach net neutrality by 2042. How do they reduce community emissions, not just the city emissions? And so their solution was to partner with external partners, Suffolk Credit Union, North Carolina Clean Energy Fund, Bright Spaces, to create a subsidized loan program for community members to get residential heat pump systems. And we're able to bring the interest rates from 6 to 14% for our unsubsidized loan to 5 to 9%, which is really good. If you're talking about 9% for someone at a 550 credit score, a lot of institutions won't serve folks down at that credit score. But we're doing a lot of new stuff. We're just being transparent. There's been other folks who've been doing green lending for a long time. We aren't them. So we're trying to assess how do these new loans present for us in terms of risk? How do we make sure that our members are actually getting the equipment that they actually need to when we don't have any experience, right? And so, well, okay, we don't have the experience in this part, but we can find partners like North Carolina Clean Energy Fund to help give us the technical assistance. So they're able to tell us, is this a 1 ton or 2 ton system that this house needs? Do they need ductwork? Do they not need ductwork? And so yeah, so that's part of it. Another part is how do we get people to know about and join the program? And so overwhelmingly, the market model for home improvement loans involves contractors referring customers to lenders. And we have no connections, but Electrify Asheville Buncombe County developed them in the area. And so that they're focused on that, and we can focus on the finances. So I just want to do some process comparisons. Electrify ABC, customer needs a heat pump. They contact a contractor, and the Electrify ABC partners work with them to get a loan project to us, and then we fund the project. Customer gets a new heat pump. That's really great. Outside of that program, our program looks very different because we don't have everything set up yet. And so we're trying to figure that out. And so you can see a lot of question marks here. Just to go over how did it go? It started last year. We've done 2 loans to date, neither to low-income borrowers. And then Helene came in, record-breaking damage, road infrastructure networks cut off, no power and water. People's homes were damaged, particularly roofs. You can't possibly put an HVAC machine in a home that isn't sealed. That's just not going to work. And then people start losing their jobs because it's fall tourism season and nobody's going there. And so when people don't have jobs, they can't qualify for a loan because you need income to get a loan. So a lot of this, frankly, got, screeching halt. And hopefully year 2, we're going to see something different. So after the hurricane, I think people understand why we're doing this, right? I think there's different places where the message you should like think about your message, how you should say it. Climate change is usually not number 1 for people. I think in Asheville, this might be the exception. So people understand that we're doing this for a reason and they want to help. Also, we as Suffolk Credit Union, we're stepping up on marketing and supporting the community. We're working closer with our partners to make sure that people understand this program. And then, soon federal energy rebates will be available in Buncombe County in June of this year. And so we're hoping that all of this together will hopefully get more loans out. Um, uh, Here's some, I will share the presentation, but I just wanted to note that we're not the only ones doing this work. There's some other folks doing it. And yeah, I'm going to stop here and then I'll swing it back to y'all and continue this conversation later.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody. So with that sort of set of on the ground and first person examples, we'd just like to spend the rest of the hour talking, asking questions and talking, clarifying how this has worked in the real world and or how it might apply to a situation in your own community. So fire away, everybody.
Well, I'll start. This is Jim. I have a question for Jonathon. I just wonder how accepting has the contractor community been to heat pumps, and what kind of pricing comparisons do you have versus gas furnaces, both initial cost and operational costs? And has that been a burden for you?
I think it has been less of a monetary challenge as far as I am concerned, but more of a cultural challenge. So contractors mostly like when they do this work, they usually replace like for like. So if there was already a gas stove, a gas furnace, they're going to replace it with another gas furnace, right? And to tell them, no, this program is just for electric heat pumps. That was a big challenge because, we have to deal with contractors, their perception, in the past, heat pumps used to not work so well in cold weather. And especially in Nashville, it gets cold. And so I think the challenge there was we had to determine whether we were going to be dogmatic about, no, it's just electric heat pumps, that's it, no ifs, ands, or buts, or do we try to educate the contractors on, okay, this is why we're doing this, and you don't have to if you don't have to force electric heat pumps onto someone, but you have to at least give them the option. So you can say, if someone has a gas furnace, they can be like, okay, do you want to replace it with a gas furnace or an electric heat pump? At least give them the option. So I don't think the money part has been the biggest challenge, but it's definitely more of a cultural, or I guess uh, I'm gonna call it inertia.
Yeah, I
Okay.
sometimes describe it as overcoming 40 years of conventional wisdom, right? Most of the owners of these small HVAC companies came up through the trades, where until the last decade, really, it's been very true that heating our homes and water with gas has been more efficient than with electric. Heat pumps have turned that upside down, but the word hasn't gotten out as much.
And Pete, I'd like to maybe just add having a CDFI or a local credit union that's interested in part of the community, right, means that the contractors they're bringing in are ones they know that can service the clientele that they're working with and meet them where they live. And I think that's really important because, as we know, even with solar, I mean, there's a lot of people that come in town to make a quick buck and they overcharge. And so having a trusted entity that people can come to not only finance it, but help get the right service and answer the questions and meet that cultural connection, I think is really important here. And it's probably way more than just the value of the cost of installation or the economic argument that's really important here. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're not sure who to trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with the solar world, self-help has actually we have a consumer protection department, and we put out a white paper on predatory solar lending, and a lot of folks like read our sort of consumer protection. We called the alarm bell on subprime mortgage lending, and so we're ringing the bell again on predatory solar, not just the contractors, but also the lending part. And so we designed our product with extreme caution because you know, number one, our concern is our customers because they trust us. They trust us with our money, and so we refuse to let them down. And so we're going to try our best to make sure that we work with folks who have a long track record of doing good projects and aren't going to run away with the money. So.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe kind of question for Lucy and Dan. To me, if I think about these opportunities with CDFIs or credit unions or green banks, where they're mission driven, where they're there for the main purpose of making something happen where it otherwise might not happen. I would think as a developer, from a developer standpoint, there'd be a lot of opportunities there. And then from your standpoint, Lucy, same thing, there'd be a lot of clients who want to tap into that mission-driven financing. Or am I missing something? Is there a downside to working with some of these institutions? And I'm not talking about Jonathon's present company excluded, but where sometimes it makes it not worthwhile because of the number of hoops you got to jump through. So I'm sort of interested in the developer's perspective as well as the strategist perspective from Lucy. Oh, you're muted, Dan.
Sorry. The infrastructure bank came to us and said, hey, we're thinking about, this is a year and a half ago, we're thinking about asking EPA for another $300 or $400 million to do electrification, EVs, battery projects, energy storage projects. What are your thoughts on how we can get more projects? Because we're developers, we're close to the projects. They're just, people inventing these financial instruments, if you will. They could put them out there, but if the dogs don't eat the dog food, then it's kind of dead on arrival, right? So they were smart. They came to us and talked to us. And the feedback they got from the developer community was like, okay, fine, you put out a state guarantee, which is wonderful, but then your distributors who are distributing this 80% loan guarantee are requiring things like a personal guarantee. And that doesn't fly for, like, I don't want to lose my house because Pacific Gas and Electric doesn't interconnect my project in time. Like, there's no amount of, wanting to do a deal that would get me to do that. Not every CDFI and bank requires it. It's sort of like case by case basis. So I would say that can be a drawback here for the kind of thing that I'm trying to work on. That's why we're trying to use the banks and CDFIs for this new loan fund more as just a servicer for the product, and then deal more at the top with the FDCs as, hey, we've done the underwriting. We have experienced underwriters on our staff who have worked with this guarantee program on hundreds of millions of dollars of loans that have been successful. Let us tackle that with these farmers because we know what you want. You bless it, you take it to iBank, you stamp it with the 80% guarantee, and we will partner at the local level with the CDFIs to make sure that the farmers are getting the servicing they need and the monthly statements and the collecting the money kind of thing. Because we don't want any part of that messy work. But we need that state guarantee to really drive down the cost of capital on 80% of our fund. So we could have a very high cost of capital on 20%, but when we're combining it with that larger sort of corpus, it really brings down the borrowing rate for farmers. And that's important. Even though energy prices in California are rising at 10% per year, you would think, oh, if you come in at 8%, that's still better than 10%. And over the long haul, the farmers will benefit. You still have to overcome that initial hurdle of, borrowing a big amount of money at a big interest rate. And so it's just, we can't do it without that state guarantee. And I don't think we're going to be able to sell it to farmers if they're putting up the entire farm with the personal guarantee. So we're hoping that this is a case where using insurance, like through Energetic and an A-rated insurer, we can kind of help bridge that gap because it's in first loss position. But then Energetic, what it does is it takes that risk and cuts it up in Lloyd's of London. And so it's selling pieces of these risks all over the globe, which is just super fascinating to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think some of the things that I've seen, so, a lot of what I shared, particularly with regard to CDFIs, takes a lot of intel to be able to produce, which sometimes is not fast, right? So I know that that's kind of one of the challenges that sometimes folks think going through a traditional financial institution, if you can, they sometimes have these it's both the pro and the con that they sometimes have these kind of more cookie cutter or copy paste products, but they can really produce more quickly and get folks the financing quicker. Also, a lot of times it comes down to terms. Again, if you can access financing through some more mainstream avenues, then sometimes the terms or the interest rates are lower. Be, in part because some CDFIs, and this is why this sort of financing is really important. A lot of the capital that CDFIs have actually comes from the mainstream financial institutions, right? And so then they have to put a spread on it in order to be able to relend it. But other thing that comes to mind, again, this is part of what I think is really, really important and is the vehicle for CDFIs to be able to innovate, but is the learning kind of component, right? But again, sometimes they'll attach programming to financing. So, you may be required to participate in a certain amount of programming and provide certain data, for example, that folks may not either have the internal capacity or the infrastructure to be able to produce, or frankly, just don't want to have to go through what they feel is an extra hurdle in exchange for these potentially favorable products. But again, given that this comes from a place of deep mission commitment, wanting to innovate, wanting to be able to unlock additional sorts of capital. But as Dan was saying, sometimes it comes down to a project by project decision. Do you have the time? And do you have the capacity, willingness, et cetera, to participate in kind of everything that comes along with it?
I think I'll cooperate on that. So, we've done, I think like lending money is certainly easy, comparatively speaking, compared to say a partnership where, an ongoing lending is happening, like Electrify Asheville, Buncombe County. It probably spent so many people's worth of time and for months and months in order to write down a legal contract. That's before any money is even like put together. So I mean, it's a really big involvement for credit union staff and also on the other side too. And so I think that's probably the major hurdle for partnership with CDFIs. I don't think it's insurmountable at all. I just think that Rome was not built in a day, and you need to treat this as the long curve. And the energy transition does not happen in a snap. Germany took 40 years to get to where they are now, and so we need to I think that our institution really values long-term partnerships. And I think that, yeah, you have to keep on working at it.
Yeah, and it also points out how important this 20 billion is, because if you can leverage that, 5, 10 times with the private sector, that's real money. That's real, megawatts in the ground, I think. So,
Hey, Michael.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, and I put it in the chat. There's a movement afoot really around this whole conversation around resiliency hubs, mutual aid at the community level of investments into doing this. You're starting to see cities move forward with things like climate resiliency plans. And then how do you build a network of resiliency hubs that is a way of also lending back into the community, but also provides disaster response and mutual aid, which is means they learn how to train response corps, that kind of thing. But you're seeing this whole movement on it. And one of the areas of finance that seems to be popping out of that is revolving funds, revolving loan funds, and ones where particularly community foundations see this as a viable way for them to participate. So anyway, I'm just seeing this, and one community foundation is actually in the process of forming their own CDFI as part of what they envision to be this delivery in the city. So I'd be kind of curious from the three of y'all what you're seeing in that space and kind of what does that look like? Because I think that's where we are politically and in the policy landscape. This seems to be about building, how do we build more capacity at the local level under resiliency, which we know we can drive that forward, seems to be, a strategic direction I'm seeing particularly local entities start now taking. And I didn't know how the finance side was going to react to that.
And I'll just point out real quickly before y'all jump in the answer, we're at about 1 minute till the hour. So if we can make our answers crisp, that's awesome. And then there's a question in the chat from Rebecca, if somebody would like to handle that after responding to Jay. Jay, I think you stumped everybody. Oh,
I can give a short answer. I think that in Asheville, I think mutual aid is definitely like everything has come up from the ground up, honestly. And it's all about responding to what the community needs. So Electrify Asheville, Buncombe County, they obviously like we weren't doing heat pumps, but people after they, experience how hard it was to live without electricity, they're like, I want help getting solar and battery systems for my house. How do I do that? And how do I do that? And how do I get that at a good price? So Electrify Asheville Buncombe County started doing these what they call home energy resilience co-ops. So basically, like say 100 people, they all want the same solar and battery, technology for their individual house. They get a discount pricing. And that obviously was already a culmination of so much work that happened beforehand, but I think it really came out of the community's needs and the community saying, we want this, can you help us? So that's my short answer.
And I can give a short answer as well. As you were talking, I mean, and this concepts is similar to when I think of collective impact networks. So this is a lot of different partners coming together so that every organization won't necessarily individually or every entity build up its own capacity to do everything. And so often collective impact networks will come together to put together complementary capacities, sometimes do joint ventures where they can kind of lend their financial, not necessarily resources, but capabilities so that there can be kind of community level resources brought in and then, kind of leveraged in that way. So I think it's a lot of different models called different things trying to essentially achieve the same effects or the same results and usually I've seen public resources brought to the table and then kind of transferred over because unfortunately it's a lot quicker, more nimble, more efficient to have someone else kind of push it through.
And I'll just add a bit to the question, Jay Rose, on revolving loan funds. I've seen them used in a number of ways. In land conservation, for 30 years, Packard Foundation has been using it very successfully. The default rate on it is extremely low. I can imagine like Marin Community Foundation lending to sort of a very sophisticated hub like Canal Alliance, which then in turn relent to grantees. I think it's done best when it is given to a very trusted NGO in the community as opposed to individuals, right? When I was on the board of Semper Virens Fund, a land conservation fund, we would borrow from the Packard Foundation and we would use that to bridge a deal. And the default rate on that is 0. We're not going to default on a major funder. Just like Canal Alliance is not going to default on the Marin Community Foundation. So it's just a way of getting the money out the door faster in the hands of knowledgeable people who can be the quarterback for those deals. And so I would encourage people to do more revolving loan funds. I think it's a wonderful idea for it, but it needs to be done sort of at a wholesale level as opposed to at a retail level.
Nice.
We're at the top of the hour. Can I just say something here?
Yeah.
I wanted to thank Lucy and Dan and Jonathon tremendously for your time and your thoughtful responses and comments. And, this is a discussion, hopefully it results in, actions being taken at some point, but it's more educational than anything else right now. And you guys have provided some good insights, so we really appreciate that.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much, everybody. Well, fantastic. With that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. If anybody would like to hang out, I can keep the line open for a little bit for any more informal Q&A. Otherwise, have a great day.